I stood in front of the mirror in my car, applying a final touch of lipstick, my armor for the evening ahead. Emily's birthday party. Another celebration where I would play my assigned role, the supportive older sister, smiling for photos, nodding at the right moments, and fading into the background like a well-trained ghost. The spring evening was perfect for a party, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of blooming jasmine across our family's suburban Connecticut home. As I walked up the familiar stone path, my heels clicking against the pavement, I could already hear the laughter and music spilling out from inside. My stomach tightened with that old familiar anxiety, the kind that only comes from returning to a place where you've never quite belonged. Through the front window, I caught glimpses of Emily, radiant in her blue dress, her perfect smile lighting up the room as she moved from group to group. She had always been the star of our family, the golden child who could do no wrong. At 25, she was already engaged to Michael, a successful real estate developer, while I, at 28, was still trying to figure out my place in the world. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The warmth of bodies and the clash of conversations hit me like a wave, but nobody turned to acknowledge my arrival. My mother, Karen, was in the center of the living room, her arm proudly wrapped around Emily's shoulders as they posed for photos. I watched as she adjusted Emily's hair with the kind of tender attention she had never shown me. "Jessica, you made it," Emily called out, her voice carrying that slight edge I'd learned to recognize over the years. The one that said, "I'm acknowledging you because I have to." She didn't move from her spot, didn't come to hug me, didn't really look at me at all. I made my way through the crowd, murmuring quiet hellos to relatives who barely glanced my way. Aunt Sarah's eyes skipped over me as if I were part of the wallpaper. Cousin Mark turned his back just as I approached his group. This was normal, I reminded myself. This was how it had always been. I needed a moment to compose myself, to rebuild the walls that were already starting to crack. The upstairs bathroom had always been my sanctuary during family gatherings. I climbed the stairs, my hand trailing along the banister, past the family photos where Emily's face dominated every frame. The few photos of me were like afterthoughts, tucked into corners or hidden behind others. The bathroom door was unlocked, thankfully. I slipped inside, but before I could even reach for the light switch, I heard the distinctive click of the lock engaging from the outside. My heart stopped. I tried the handle. Nothing. I was trapped. "Hello?" I called out, my voice wavering. "Is someone there?" Only silence answered. Through the door, I could hear the muffled sounds of the party continuing below, music and laughter floating up like a cruel reminder of my exclusion. I was literally locked away from my sister's celebration, and somehow, it felt like the perfect metaphor for my entire life in this family. In that moment, standing alone in the darkness, I realized this wasn't just another slight to brush off. This was the beginning of something else entirely. The moment when being the good sister, the invisible sister, stopped being enough. Growing up as Emily's older sister meant living in a constant shadow. Looking back now, trapped in this dark bathroom, I can trace the pattern of invisibility back to my earliest memories. I was 7 when Emily was born, and from that moment, it was as if a spotlight shifted, leaving me in perpetual darkness. I remember the day of her first ballet recital. I was 14, and I had just won first place in the state science fair with my project on renewable energy. Mom and Dad didn't come to my award ceremony. They couldn't miss Emily's performance. I sat alone on the stage as other parents cheered for their children, clutching my blue ribbon and forcing myself not to cry. When I got home that evening, nobody asked how it went. The house was full of pictures of Emily in her tutu, and my ribbon ended up in a drawer, forgotten. That pattern continued through high school and college. I worked 2 jobs to put myself through university while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. Emily got a full ride to her dream school because Mom and Dad had saved for her education. When I graduated summa cum laude from Boston University, my parents attended. the ceremony, but left early. Emily had a cheerleading competition that afternoon. I built a life for myself despite the neglect. I became an environmental engineer, designing sustainable building solutions. My work has won awards, been featured in magazines, and makes a real difference in the world. But at family gatherings, all anyone ever wants to talk about is Emily's latest achievement or her upcoming wedding to Michael. Michael. Even thinking about him now makes my heart ache in a complicated way. He's the only one who ever seemed to notice me at family events. Sometimes I catch him looking at me with a mixture of pity and curiosity, as if he can see the years of invisible wounds I carry. Once, at last year's Christmas dinner, he asked about my work, and for 5 beautiful minutes, I felt seen. Until Emily swooped in, redirecting the conversation to their wedding plans. The worst part isn't the big moments of exclusion. It's the 1,000 tiny cuts that came daily. The way Mom would cook Emily's favorite meals but never remember my allergies. How Dad would drop everything to help Emily with her car but told me to figure it out when mine broke down. The family group chat where my messages go unread while everyone responds to Emily's latest updates within minutes. I tried so hard to be perfect, to be worthy of their attention. I never rebelled, never caused problems, never asked for more than what was freely given, which was nearly nothing. I became an expert at taking care of myself, at building a life in the margins of my family's attention. I learned to find pride in my independence, in my ability to survive and thrive despite being treated like an afterthought. But standing here now, locked in this bathroom during yet another celebration of Emily's charmed life, I realize that surviving isn't enough anymore. The good sister, the invisible sister, the one who smiles and accepts and forgives. She's tired, so tired. And somewhere beneath the exhaustion, there's a rage building that I've never allowed myself to feel before. The sound of footsteps in the hallway pulls me from my thoughts. Someone's coming, and for the first time in my life, I'm not sure I want to forgive and forget. Not this time, not anymore. The footsteps stopped outside the bathroom door. I held my breath, listening to the subtle creak of floorboards under whoever stood there. Finally, I heard my mother's voice, cold and dismissive as ever. "Jessica, stop being dramatic and come out." The irony of her words, as if I had locked myself in, made me want to laugh and scream simultaneously. "I can't," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. Someone locked the door from the outside. There was a pause, then the sound of whispering. I pressed my ear against the door, catching fragments of a conversation between my mother and Emily. She's always like this, making everything about her, ruining my birthday. The lock clicked, and light flooded the bathroom as the door swung open. Emily stood there, resplendent in her blue dress, with Mom hovering behind her like a protective shadow. Neither of them looked concerned. If anything, they seemed annoyed, as if I had inconvenienced them by being locked in the dark. "Really, Jessica?" Emily's voice dripped with condescension. "Making a scene at my birthday party? Some things never change." I felt something snap inside me. Years of swallowed words rose to my throat. Making a scene? I was locked in here. Someone deliberately trapped me in this bathroom and you're acting like I'm the problem? "Oh, please," Mom cut in, her perfectly manicured hand waving dismissively. "The lock probably stuck. This house is old, you know that. Now can we please get back to the party?" The caterers are about to bring out Emily's cake. I looked between them. My mother and sister, so similar in their carefully crafted expressions of dismissal. But there was something else there too. Something I'd never noticed before. A flash of satisfaction in Emily's eyes. A slight upturn at the corner of Mom's mouth. It was subtle, but in that moment, I saw it clearly. They were enjoying this. The lock didn't stick. I said quietly, my voice stronger than I expected. Someone turned it from the outside. I heard them. Emily's face changed for a split second, a micro-expression of guilt, quickly masked by irritation. God, you're paranoid. This is exactly why people find it hard to be around you, Jessica. You're always imagining conspiracies, always playing the victim. But I wasn't imagining the way she glanced at Mom, the silent communication that passed between them. I wasn't imagining how they positioned themselves to block my exit from the bathroom, forcing me to squeeze past them awkwardly. And I definitely wasn't imagining the whispers that followed me down the hallway as I made my way back to the party. For the first time, I began to see the pattern not as a series of accidents or oversights, but as something more deliberate. The constant exclusion, the forgotten invitations, the interrupted conversations, had they been orchestrated all along? Was I not just the forgotten sister, but the actively pushed aside one? As I descended the stairs, I caught sight of Michael watching me from across the room. The look on his face was different from the usual pity. There was recognition there, and something else. Concern. He started to move toward me, but Emily suddenly appeared at his side, her hand gripping his arm possessively. The message was clear. Stay away. But it was too late. I'd seen something in Michael's eyes that confirmed my growing suspicion. This wasn't just about me anymore. There was something bigger happening, something that had been carefully hidden beneath the surface of our perfect family facade. And for the first time in my life, I intended to find out exactly what it was. I found myself in the kitchen, ostensibly, helping with the cake preparations, but really using the moment to observe. It's amazing what you can see when you finally stop trying to be seen. Like a wildlife photographer, I became invisible by choice rather than circumstance, and the truth began to unfold before me. Emily moved through the party like a master conductor, orchestrating every interaction with subtle precision. I watched as she steered certain guests away from others, whispered quick words that changed the direction of conversations, and controlled the flow of the entire evening through seemingly innocent suggestions. How had I never noticed this before? But the real revelation came when I saw her with Michael. From my vantage point behind the kitchen island, I could see their interactions clearly. Every time he tried to break away from her carefully choreographed circles, she would appear with a touch, a word, or a task that needed his immediate attention. His smile never quite reached his eyes anymore. "Jessica, you're blocking the way to the wine fridge," Mom's sharp voice cut through my observations. But this time, instead of immediately apologizing and moving aside as I usually would, I took my time turning around. "I was just thinking about Thanksgiving," I said casually, watching her face. "Remember when you asked me to look for old photos in my room, when Emily was away with her college boyfriend?" The slight tightening around her eyes was almost imperceptible. Almost. "I don't recall that," she said, but her hand trembled slightly as she reached for a wine glass. "I found your diary that day, Mom." The words came out soft, but they landed like stones in still water. "The one where you wrote about Emily's every achievement, every milestone, every perfect moment." The color drained from her face. "That was private. So was my pain." I surprised myself with the steadiness of my voice. "But we don't talk about that, do we? Just like we don't talk about how Emily's first fiancé disappeared so suddenly, or how Michael's family business mysteriously started struggling right after he proposed." Mom's fingers gripped the counter edge. "You need to stop this right now," she hissed. "You're trying to ruin your sister's party with these ridiculous insinuations." But I wasn't insinuating anything. I was finally seeing the truth, assembling the puzzle pieces that had been scattered throughout my life. The way Emily's competitors in school always seemed to transfer or drop out. How her rivals at work mysteriously received better offers elsewhere. The careful way she had isolated Michael from his friends and family over the past year. I smiled at my mother, and for the first time, I saw fear flicker across her face. Not fear of what I might do, but fear that I could see. Really see. "Don't worry, Mom," I said, picking up a tray of champagne glasses. "I'm done being the good sister who looks away. Now I'm going to be the sister who watches, really watches." As I walked back into the party, I caught Michael's eye across the room. There was a desperate question in his gaze, and I gave him the slightest nod. Whatever game Emily was playing, whatever web she had woven around all of us, I was no longer its victim. I was becoming its witness. In the background, I could hear Emily laughing, that perfect, practiced sound that had always seemed to draw everyone toward her. But now I could hear the hollow notes in it, the careful calculation behind each melodic rise and fall. I took my place against the wall, champagne glass in hand, and settled in to observe the show with new eyes. The invisible sister was about to become the most dangerous person in the room, because nobody thinks to hide their secrets from someone they don't see. The party continued into the evening, but I was no longer playing my usual role of the forgotten wallflower. Instead, I had become something else entirely, an observer, a collector of truths. Every conversation I overheard, every interaction I witnessed, added another piece to the puzzle I was finally allowing myself to see. I positioned myself near the French doors leading to the garden, watching as Emily worked the room. She was putting on the performance of her life, but now I could see the machinery behind the magic show. The way she would whisper something to Aunt Sarah, then watch with satisfied eyes as Sarah would suddenly become cold toward Michael's sister, Jennifer. How she would touch Michael's arm possessively whenever he seemed to be having too genuine a conversation with anyone else. More champagne? A server appeared at my elbow, and I noticed it was the third time Emily had sent someone to check on my drinking. She wanted me fuzzy, unfocused. Too bad I'd been secretly tipping my drinks into the potted plants all evening. "Actually," I said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "I'd love some water. Need to stay sharp to help my dear sister with all the arrangements." The flash of annoyance that crossed Emily's face from across the room was worth it. As I sipped my water, I watched Michael trying to have a conversation with his old college friend, Tom. Emily appeared as if by magic, sliding her arm through Michael's. "Darling, we need you for the family photos," she said sweetly. But I saw her other hand, the one hidden from view, gripping his arm with white-knuckled force. "I was just catching up with Tom about the old development project we were planning," Michael said, a note of resistance in his voice that I'd never heard before. "Oh, that silly thing?" Emily laughed, the sound like wind chimes masking a storm. "Didn't Tom's company just lose their major investor? Such a shame." Her words were honey-coated poison, and I watched Tom's face fall. Another casualty of Emily's careful manipulations. I pulled out my phone and started taking notes, disguising it as casual social media scrolling. Emily's techniques were becoming clear. Isolate, manipulate, control. She had been doing it for years, not just to me, but to everyone around her. The pattern was obvious once you knew what to look for. A movement caught my eye. Michael was heading toward the garden, alone for the first time all evening. Emily was distracted, dealing with a minor crisis she'd likely orchestrated herself involving the cake presentation. This was my chance. I slipped out into the garden, the cool evening air a relief after the suffocating atmosphere inside. Michael stood by the old oak tree, his shoulders tense, scrolling through his phone with shaking hands. "The service out here is terrible," I said quietly, making him jump. "Has been ever since Emily convinced Mom and Dad to switch providers last month. Funny how that happened right after you mentioned wanting to work remotely more often." Michael turned to me, his face a mask of carefully controlled fear. "Jessica," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I think I've made a terrible mistake." "No," I replied, taking out my phone and pulling up my notes from the evening. "You're just finally seeing what I've been watching all night. Would you like to know what I've observed about your fiancé's perfect birthday party?" He glanced nervously at the house, then back to me. In that moment, I saw my own years of fear reflected in his eyes. But now, armed with evidence and clarity, I was ready to help him see the full picture of the web we were both caught in. "Tell me everything," he said. And for the first time that evening, I felt truly powerful. The truth, carefully collected and strategically revealed, was about to become my greatest weapon. The garden had always been my refuge during family gatherings, and now it became the stage for a conversation that would change everything. Michael and I stood in the shadows of the old oak tree, our voices barely above whispers, while the sounds of Emily's perfectly orchestrated party drifted through the evening air. "It started small," Michael began, his hands fidgeting with his watch, a nervous habit I'd noticed whenever Emily wasn't around to stop him. Comments about my friends, suggestions about my business decisions, always framed as loving concern. He laughed bitterly. "Did you know she convinced me to let her handle all our wedding arrangements? Said it would be less stress for me." I nodded, pulling up my notes. "And suddenly, all your preferred vendors had scheduling conflicts or went out of business?" His head snapped up. "How did you—" "Because that's her pattern," I said, showing him my phone. "Look at what I've documented just tonight. 3 conversations where she isolated you from friends, 4 instances of her spreading subtle misinformation about your work, and at least 6 moments where she physically prevented you from having private conversations." Michael's face grew paler with each example. "Last month," he said, his voice shaking, "my biggest client suddenly pulled out of a major development deal. Emily said she'd heard rumors about their financial instability. But now—" He trailed off, realization dawning in his eyes. "Let me guess. She suggested an alternative client. Someone she knew personally?" He nodded slowly. "Her friend's investment firm. They offered to save the project, but with conditions that would give them majority control." His hands were trembling now. "God, I've been so blind." "We all were," I said softly. "Emily's greatest talent is making her manipulation feel like protection, like love." I scrolled through more notes. "Did you know she's already been talking to divorce attorneys?" "What?" The color drained completely from his face. "I overheard her on the phone last week when I stopped by to drop off her birthday gift. She was in the garden, discussing prenuptial agreement loopholes with someone named Harrison Blake." Michael's knees seemed to give out, and he sat heavily on the garden bench. "Harrison Blake is the most aggressive divorce attorney in Connecticut. He's known for destroying people's lives in court." He looked up at me, fear and anger warring in his expression. "We're not even married yet, and she's already planning the end game," I finished for him. "Emily never starts anything without knowing exactly how she'll finish it. I've watched her do it my entire life." I sat beside him, sharing my screen. "Look at these text messages she sent me last year, after I won the Environmental Innovation Award, congratulating me while simultaneously spreading rumors in the industry that my research was flawed." As we sat there, sharing stories and comparing notes, a strange kind of energy began to build between us. The power of shared truth, of finally being able to speak our reality aloud. We were like 2 people who had been gaslighted for years, finally comparing our journals and confirming we weren't crazy. "What do we do?" Michael asked, and for the first time I heard strength returning to his voice. Before I could answer, a twig snapped nearby. We both turned to see Emily standing at the garden's entrance, her silhouette backlit by the party lights. She couldn't have heard us. We were too far away. But her presence was a chilling reminder of what we were up against. "Michael, darling," she called, her voice sweet as poison. "Mother's looking for us. It's time for the special announcement." I felt Michael stiffen beside me. "The announcement?" I whispered. "She wants to move up the wedding," he murmured back, his voice tight with new understanding. "Push it forward by 6 months." I squeezed his arm gently, a silent promise of support. "Don't react," I breathed. "Let her think she's still in control. But tomorrow morning, check your email. You'll find everything I've documented. Everything you need to know." As Michael stood to join his fiancée, I saw something I'd never seen before. The slight straightening of his spine, the subtle squaring of his shoulders. He was no longer a man unknowingly walking into a trap. He was a man, preparing for battle, and so was I. Back inside, the party had reached that perfect fever pitch that Emily always managed to create. Just enough champagne flowing to make everyone pliable, just enough music to mask private conversations, just enough warmth to make people lower their guards. But now I saw it for what it was, a carefully crafted stage for her next performance. Mom clinked her glass, calling for attention. The room hushed as Emily and Michael took their place at the center. I positioned myself near Jennifer, Michael's sister, close enough to watch every micro-expression cross her face during what was coming. "First," Emily began, her voice carrying that practiced mix of humility and excitement, "I want to thank everyone for making my birthday so special." She paused, touching Michael's arm in that possessive way I'd grown to recognize. "But tonight isn't just about celebrating another year. Michael and I have an announcement." I watched his face carefully. To anyone else, he appeared the picture of a devoted fiancé. But I caught the slight tension in his jaw, the way his left hand curled into a loose fist at his side. "We've decided," Emily continued, beaming, "that life is too short to wait. We're moving our wedding up to next month." The room erupted in excited gasps and congratulations. I observed as Emily's carefully planted supporters immediately began gushing about how romantic it was, how perfect, how meant to be. But I also noticed the others. The slight frown on Jennifer's face, the worried glance from Michael's best friend Tom, the way his parents exchanged uncertain looks. "Of course," Emily added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone that nevertheless carried across the room. "This means we'll have to make some changes to the arrangements. Smaller venue, more intimate gathering." She smiled apologetically at the crowd. "We'll have to be very selective about the guest list." And there it was, the threat wrapped in silk. I watched as people practically tripped over themselves to offer help, to ensure their place at the intimate ceremony. Emily had just turned her wedding into a social Hunger Game, and everyone was already playing exactly as she'd planned. But I saw something else too. As Emily detailed the changes, I noticed her left hand repeatedly touching her phone in her dress pocket. She was waiting for something. A message? A call? Whatever her endgame was, this rushed wedding was just one piece of a larger puzzle. I slipped my own phone out and typed a quick message to Michael. "Check your business emails from the last hour." I'd seen Emily's friend Rebecca, a paralegal at a major corporate law firm, sneaking looks at her phone throughout the announcement. Something was happening behind the scenes. Michael discreetly glanced at his phone, and I saw the moment he understood. His company's merger deal, the one that would have given him financial independence, must have just fallen through. The timing wasn't coincidental. "And of course," Emily's voice cut through my thoughts, "my dear sister Jessica will be my maid of honor." The room turned to look at me, and for once I welcomed the attention. I smiled, channeling years of practice at playing the supportive sister. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I said, raising my water glass. Only Emily would know that my words were a challenge, not a promise. As the crowd returned to their celebrations, I caught Mom watching, me with narrow eyes. She'd always been Emily's most loyal lieutenant, but now I saw uncertainty in her gaze. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure she could read her eldest daughter's intentions. Good. Because while Emily had spent years perfecting the art of manipulation through chaos, she'd forgotten one crucial detail. She'd taught me everything I knew about staying invisible, about watching, about waiting, and now I was going to show her exactly how well I'd learned those lessons. I felt my phone vibrate, an email from Michael's company's board of directors. I'd been busy during my time in the garden, sending anonymous tips about irregularities in recent contract cancellations. The board was calling an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. The game was changing. And for once, I wasn't just a pawn on Emily's board. I was becoming a player she never saw coming. The hour following Emily's announcement was like watching a chess game where all the pieces had suddenly developed minds of their own. People clustered in small groups, their champagne glasses providing poor cover for their whispered concerns about the rushed wedding. I moved between them like a ghost, collecting fragments of conversations that were beginning to shift from celebration to speculation. "It's just so sudden," I overheard Jennifer saying to her parents. "And right before Michael's company's expansion?" The worry in her voice was plain, but she didn't know the half of it. My phone buzzed again. Another email from Michael's board members responding to my anonymous tip. I excused myself to the powder room to read it properly. The evidence I'd sent them about the suspicious pattern of contract cancellations had struck a nerve. Words like investigation and external audit jumped out from the screen. When I emerged, I found Emily waiting for me in the hallway. Her smile was perfect as always, but there was a new tension around her eyes. "Having fun, sister dear?" she asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You've been quite present tonight, more than usual." I matched her smile with one of my own. "Well, it is a special night. After all, it's not every day my sister announces she's rushing to the altar." I paused deliberately. Though I have to wonder about the timing. Wasn't Michael's company supposed to close that major deal next month? A flicker of something, surprise, concern, crossed her face before she could mask it. "Business matters aren't really your concern, Jessica. But since you've suddenly developed such an interest in my life, maybe we should talk about your recent activities." "My activities?" I kept my voice neutral, curious. "I know you've been talking to Michael." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Whatever you think you're doing, whatever sad little scheme you're plotting, stop. You're only going to embarrass yourself. Again." The threat was clear, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel it sting. Instead, I felt something close to pity. Emily still thought she was dealing with the old Jessica, the one who would cower and retreat. She had no idea that every threatening word she spoke was being recorded on my phone, adding to the growing collection of evidence. "You know what I remember most about being locked in that bathroom earlier?" I said, watching her carefully. "The sound of your heels walking away after you turned the lock. Very distinctive sound, that new Louboutin click. I'm sure the police would find it interesting. Assault and false imprisonment are serious charges after all." The color drained from her face. "You wouldn't dare." "The old Jessica wouldn't," I agreed. But then again, the old Jessica didn't know about Harrison Blake, or the prenup plans, or the mysterious pattern of Michael's business contacts, suddenly dropping him right when he was about to achieve independence from your family's influence. Emily's perfect mask cracked, just for a moment, revealing the calculating creature beneath. "Mom was right," she hissed. "We should have sent you to that boarding school in Switzerland when we had the chance." "Ah, yes, the same one where you sent Claire Thompson when she was competing with you for valedictorian?" I smiled. "I did some research on that school, by the way. Interesting how many of your former rivals ended up there, only to drop out of sight completely." A sound from the party made Emily turn her head sharply. Michael was looking for her, calling her name. When she turned back to me, her composure was restored, but something had changed in her eyes. For the first time in our lives, I saw fear there. "This conversation isn't over," she said, smoothing her dress. "No," I agreed, watching her retreat toward Michael's voice. "It's just beginning." I waited until she was gone, before allowing myself a small smile. Emily had spent years building her house of cards, each level carefully constructed with threats, manipulations, and careful planning. But she'd forgotten one crucial detail. I'd been watching her build it all along. And now, piece by piece, I was going to help it fall. The party had reached that crucial tipping point where facades begin to crack. Like hairline fractures spreading through glass, the perfect veneer of Emily's celebration was beginning to show its weaknesses. I watched from my corner as Michael's parents huddled with Jennifer, their worried glances toward their soon-to-be daughter-in-law becoming more obvious by the minute. My phone had become a silent weapon, buzzing with incoming messages from people I'd carefully contacted throughout the evening. Claire Thompson, Emily's old high school rival, had finally responded to my email with a detailed account of how she'd been pressured into leaving school. 3 other former friends of Emily's had sent similar stories, each one adding another piece to the puzzle of her systematic manipulation. But the most significant message came from Harrison Blake's office. My anonymous tip about potential ethical violations in his handling of prenuptial agreements had struck home. His assistant, sensing a scandal, had forwarded me emails detailing Emily's plans, not just for divorcing Michael, but for systematically stripping him of his company assets. I was about to review these documents when I felt a presence beside me. It was Tom, Michael's college friend, his face flushed from more than just champagne. "Your sister," he said quietly, "just tried to convince my biggest investor to pull out of our joint venture with Michael's company." He glanced around nervously before continuing. "But she didn't know that I recorded the conversation." I felt a surge of unexpected allyship. "Would you be willing to share that recording?" He nodded, already pulling out his phone. "Michael's been my friend since freshman year. I always knew something was off about Emily, but I couldn't prove it. Until now." As Tom forwarded me the audio file, I noticed Jennifer making her way toward us, followed by Michael's parents. The look in their eyes told me everything. They'd reached their breaking point. "We need to talk," Jennifer said, her voice tight, with controlled anger. "About Emily, about the wedding, about everything." I led our small group out onto the side terrace, away from the party's watchful eyes. There, in the growing darkness, I shared what I'd discovered. The systematic isolation of Michael, the strategic undermining of his business relationships, the carefully planned legal trap of the rushed wedding and hidden divorce preparations. "She's been playing a long game," I explained, showing them the timeline I'd constructed. Every casual suggestion, every coincidental business failure, every new friend who mysteriously replaced an old one. It was all leading to this moment when Michael would be completely dependent on her family's connections. Michael's father, a retired judge, studied my evidence with growing horror. "This isn't just manipulation," he said finally. "This is calculated financial and emotional abuse." "And it's not the first time she's done it," Jennifer added, her legal training evident in her analytical tone. "I've been doing some digging since you contacted me last week, Jessica. There's a pattern of similar behavior with her ex-boyfriends, former business partners, even childhood friends." The weight of truth hung heavy in the air between us. We were no longer just suspicious individuals. We had become a coalition of witnesses, each holding a piece of evidence that proved Emily's true nature. "What do we do now?" Tom asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before I could answer, we heard the sound of breaking glass from inside, followed by Emily's voice rising in uncharacteristic anger. Through the terrace doors, I could see her confronting Michael, her perfect composure finally cracking as she realized he'd been on his phone during her entire announcement, not texting, but forwarding crucial company documents to his lawyers. "Now," I said, watching the scene unfold. "We wait. Emily's greatest weakness has always been her belief in her own invincibility. When people start questioning her version of reality..." I paused, allowing myself a small smile. "She tends to show her true colors." As if on cue, Emily's voice rose even higher, carrying clearly through the terrace doors. Everything I did was for us. You were nothing before me. Nothing. The mask had finally slipped, and everyone at the party could see what lay beneath. Sometimes, I realized, the most powerful weapon against manipulation isn't confrontation. It's simply creating a space where the truth can't help but reveal itself. The scene that unfolded in our family's living room would have been perfect for one of those reality TV shows Emily loved to mock. The carefully curated party atmosphere had dissolved into something raw and real, with my sister standing in the center, her designer dress suddenly looking more like armor than elegance. What exactly do you mean by nothing before you, Emily? Michael's voice was calm, controlled, and carried across the now silent room. Because I have some interesting emails here, suggesting you've been systematically sabotaging my company for the past year. Emily's laugh was sharp, brittle. Don't be ridiculous. I've only ever helped you. Who introduced you to your new investors? Who helped you restructure your client base? You mean the investors who just mysteriously pulled out right before the merger? Michael held up his phone. The same investors who, according to these emails, received some very interesting calls from you last week. I watched from the terrace. Doorway as the audience Emily had so carefully cultivated all these years became witnesses to her unraveling. Mom started to move forward, probably to try to smooth things over as she always did. But I finally stepped into the light. Let her answer, Mom, I said, my voice carrying that same quiet strength I'd found in the bathroom hours earlier. I think we'd all like to hear Emily explain a few things, like why Harrison Blake was discussing divorce strategies before the wedding was even moved up. The splash of color that drained from Emily's face was all the confirmation the room needed. Several guests gasped. Jennifer stepped forward, phone in hand. While we're asking questions, she added, maybe you could explain these transfer proposals I found, planning to move Michael's company assets to offshore accounts after the wedding? Emily's head whipped around, her eyes wild. You're all conspiring against me. She turned to our mother. Mom, tell them. Tell them how I've always looked out for everyone, how I've only ever wanted what's best. By sending Claire Thompson to Switzerland? I interrupted. By sabotaging Rebecca's law school application? By orchestrating the coincidental job offers that removed every friend or colleague who didn't fit into your perfect plan? You have no proof, Emily snarled, but her perfect mask had cracked beyond repair. Actually, Tom's voice rose from the crowd, holding up his phone. We do. Would you like to hear the recording of your conversation with my investor from earlier tonight? The one where you explained how you plan to gain control of both our companies through the merger? The room erupted in murmurs. Emily's perfectly orchestrated world was collapsing in real time, and we could all see the desperate calculations running behind her eyes as she searched for an escape route. Michael, she tried, her voice switching to that soft, manipulative tone I knew so well. Baby, you know everything I did was for us, for our future. These people, they're trying to tear us apart. They're jealous of what we have. But Michael wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at his phone, where new messages kept arriving from the emergency board meeting I'd helped trigger. No, Emily, he said quietly. What we had was a carefully constructed lie. And now everyone can see it. You ungrateful... Emily's scream of rage was cut short as she lunged for Michael's phone. In that moment, her carefully maintained poise vanished completely. She knocked over a champagne tower, sending glass cascading across the floor in a shower of crystalline destruction that perfectly matched the shattering of her carefully constructed facade. The room frozen in shocked silence as Emily stood there, designer dress splattered with champagne, her face contorted in a fury that showed everyone exactly who she really was. Years of careful manipulation, of subtle control, of perfect appearances, all undone in a single moment of uncontrolled rage. Emily, I said softly, stepping forward as I pressed record on my phone. I think it's time you stopped performing and started explaining. Because right now, everyone in this room is finally seeing the real you. And we have questions. So many questions. The look she gave me was pure venom. But for the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. Because the invisible sister had finally stepped into the light, and she wasn't alone anymore. The truth, like the shattered champagne glasses at our feet, couldn't be put back together again. The aftermath of a perfect facade shattering is never neat or clean. In the hours following Emily's meltdown, our family home became a stage for a different kind of drama. One where truth, long suppressed, finally demanded its moment in the spotlight. Most of the party guests had left, unable to bear the weight of reality crushing through years of polite fiction. Those who remained were the ones who needed answers. Michael's family, Tom, and a handful of Emily's former victims who had arrived after receiving my messages throughout the evening. Emily sat in our father's old armchair, her champagne-stained dress a stark contrast to her usual perfection. Mom hovered nearby, but even she seemed uncertain now, her hand reaching out to comfort Emily before pulling back, as if finally questioning every instinct she'd developed over the years. "I want to know about Claire," Jennifer said, breaking the heavy silence. She stood with her legal pad ready, every inch the prosecutor she'd trained to be. "Start with why you really sent her to Switzerland." Emily's laugh was hollow. "Is that what this is now? A trial?" "No," I interjected, sitting across from her. "This is your chance to finally tell the truth. Because right now, we have emails, recordings, and witness statements that paint a very clear picture. But we're giving you the opportunity to explain yourself." "Explain myself?" Emily's voice rose sharply. "To you? My bitter, jealous sister who's spent the evening destroying everything I've built? Everything you've built was founded on manipulation and lies," Michael said quietly. He stood by the fireplace, still scrolling through the mounting evidence on his phone. "The board just voted to freeze all recent transactions pending investigation. They've found irregularities going back months." I watched as Emily's eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally, an escape route, anything. But her carefully cultivated support system had crumbled, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone. "Mom," she tried, her voice taking on that familiar pleading tone that had worked so many times before. "You understand, don't you? Everything I did was to protect our family's reputation, to ensure we stayed at the top." But Mom's face had changed. She was looking at the diary I'd placed on the coffee table, the one documenting years of Emily's achievements and my erasure. "Did you really threaten Claire's father's business?" she asked softly. "Did you actually orchestrate all those coincidences that kept happening to people who opposed you?" Emily's silence was answer enough. "Tell them about Rebecca's law school application," I prompted, watching Emily's face carefully. "About how you ensured your only real competition at the firm would never make it through her first year." "She was a threat," Emily snapped, and in that moment, her mask slipped completely. "They were all threats. Everything I built, everything I achieved. Do you think it just happened by accident? In this world, you have to eliminate the competition. You have to control the narrative. I did what was necessary." The room fell silent at this confession. Even Mom stepped back, her hand covering her mouth in horror. "And me?" I asked quietly. "Was I a threat too? Is that why you've spent years ensuring I remained invisible, excluded, forgotten?" Emily's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something close to truth in them. "You were the biggest threat of all," she whispered, "because you saw through me. Even when you didn't realize it, you saw me. So yes, I made sure no one else would see you. It was necessary." "Necessary," Michael repeated, his voice thick with disgust. "Like sabotaging my company was necessary? Like planning our divorce before we even got married was necessary?" Emily stood suddenly, her composure cracking completely. None of you understand what it takes to stay on top, to maintain perfection. I did what I had to do, and I'd do it. Again. Her words hung in the air, damning in their honesty. In trying to defend herself, she had finally revealed her true nature to everyone who mattered. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of years of manipulation, finally exposed to the light. "Well," Jennifer said, closing her notebook. With a decisive snap, "I think we have everything we need for the restraining order, and the SEC will be very interested in these financial manipulations." Emily's face went pale as the real consequences of her actions began to sink in. Her perfect world wasn't just cracking. It was about to come crashing down around her. And this time, there would be no manipulation, no careful planning that could save her from the truth she had finally spoken aloud. The house had finally emptied, leaving just Emily and me in the kitchen. The same kitchen where we'd grown up, where she'd first learned to manipulate, where I'd first learned to disappear. The soft hum of the refrigerator filled the silence between us as Emily methodically removed her expensive jewelry, placing each piece on the counter with deliberate care. "You know what's funny?" she said, not looking at me as she slipped off her tennis bracelet, Michael's first gift to her. "I always thought you were the weak one, the soft one. Turns out you were just waiting, watching, learning." I leaned against the counter, watching my sister dismantle her armor piece by piece. "I learned from the best," I replied quietly. "You taught me everything about patience, about observation. You just never thought I'd use those lessons against you." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Against me? You destroyed me, Jessica. My engagement, my career, my reputation, all gone in one evening." She finally looked up at me, and I saw something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Respect, tinged with fear. "How long have you been planning this?" "I haven't been," I said honestly. "Not really. I've just been collecting pieces of truth, storing them away like winter supplies. Tonight was just the first time I decided to use them." Emily's hand stilled on her necklace clasp. "Why tonight?" "Because of the bathroom incident," I replied, watching her face carefully. That was the moment I realized something. You didn't just want me invisible anymore. You wanted me gone completely. She didn't deny it. Instead, she asked, "When did you first know? About who I really was?" I thought back to all the years of careful observation, of quiet documentation. I think I always knew, but I didn't want to believe it. You were my sister, Emily. Despite everything, I wanted to believe there was love somewhere beneath all the manipulation. Love? She tested the word like it was foreign to her. Love is weakness, Jessica. Love is what makes people vulnerable, controllable. I learned that watching Mom and Dad, watching you. No, I said firmly. Love is what saved me. Because even when you were pushing me into the shadows, I never lost the capacity to care about others. That's how I built the network that brought you down. Not through manipulation, but through genuine connection with all the people you'd hurt. Emily slumped into one of the kitchen chairs, suddenly looking very young and very tired. What happens now? Now? I moved to sit across from her. Now the SEC investigates your financial manipulations. Jennifer proceeds with the legal actions on behalf of your victims. Michael's company recovers from your sabotage. I paused, studying her face. And you get to experience what it's like to live without control over everyone around you. And you? She asked, an edge of bitterness in her voice. Do you take my place? Become the favorite daughter now? I shook my head, feeling a strange mix of pity and resolution. I don't want your place, Emily. I don't want any place that requires me to destroy others to maintain it. I'm going to do something much scarier. I'm going to live authentically, visibly, and let people see me for who I really am. Tears, real ones, not the calculated drops she'd used to manipulate so many times before, began to roll down her cheeks. "I don't know how to do that," she whispered. "I know," I said, softly. "That's the tragedy of it all. You spent so long building this perfect facade that you forgot who you were beneath it. But maybe now, with everything stripped away, you'll have the chance to find out." I stood up, gathering my things to leave. At the kitchen door, I turned, back one last time. "I loved you, Emily. The real you, whoever she was before all this. I hope someday you find her again." She didn't respond, but I saw her reflection in the window. A small, uncertain figure in a stained designer dress, facing a future she couldn't control for the first time in her life. As I walked away, I realized that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone face the consequences of their actions, even when those consequences hurt to watch. The weeks following Emily's birthday party unfolded like pages turning in a new book. Each day brought changes, some subtle and others profound, as the ripples of truth continued to spread through our family and social circles. I watched it all with a strange mix of sadness and liberation, like someone emerging from a long darkness into bright sunlight. Painful at first, but gradually becoming clearer and warmer. Mom came to see me at my apartment one rainy Tuesday afternoon. She stood in my living room, looking at my environmental engineering awards displayed proudly on the wall, awards she'd never bothered to acknowledge before. "I didn't know," she said softly, reaching out to touch one of the frames. "About any of this. About you." She turned to face me, her eyes filled with tears. Or maybe I did know, and I just chose not to see. "That's what Emily counted on," I replied, gesturing for her to sit. "Everyone choosing not to see." We talked for hours that afternoon. Really talked, perhaps for the first time in my adult life. Mom shared her own stories of family dynamics, of the pressure to maintain appearances, of how she'd unknowingly helped create the environment that allowed Emily to become who she was. I shared my experiences of growing up invisible, but also of finding strength in that invisibility, of learning to observe and understand people in a way that Emily, always focused on control, never could. "Your father would be proud of you," Mom said as she was leaving. "He always said you had a quiet strength. I wish I'd listened to him more." The professional fallout was significant, but necessary. Emily's firm placed her on indefinite leave pending investigation. Michael's company began to recover as the truth about the sabotage deals came to light. Jennifer, working with a team of lawyers, helped several of Emily's former victims seek restitution and justice. But the most profound changes were happening in the quiet moments. Claire Thompson reached out to me, and we began meeting regularly for coffee, sharing stories, and healing old wounds. Tom and Michael's other friends started including me in their gatherings, no longer afraid of Emily's disapproval. I was stepping into the light, and finding that visibility didn't have to mean vulnerability. One evening, as I sat in my favorite cafe working on a new sustainable building project, Michael stopped by unexpectedly. "I wanted to thank you," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Not just for saving me from a huge mistake, but for showing me what real strength looks like." I looked up from my blueprints, studying his face. The haunted look he'd worn during his engagement to Emily was gone, replaced by something calmer, more genuine. "How are you doing?" I asked, genuinely curious. He smiled, a real smile, not the careful one Emily had trained him to use. "Better. The company's recovering. I'm in therapy, learning to trust my instincts again." He paused, then added, "I'm learning a lot from your example, actually. About being authentic, about not hiding who you are." Ironic, isn't it? I mused. That the invisible sister ended up teaching people about being visible. "Not ironic," he corrected gently. "Perfect. Because you never actually were invisible, Jessica. You were just seeing everything clearly, while the rest of us were blinded by Emily's performance. As he left, I thought about his words. He was right. I had never really been invisible. I had been present all along, watching, understanding, gathering strength. Emily's greatest mistake wasn't in pushing me into the shadows. It was in forgetting that shadows can be a source of power, a place to grow until you're ready to step into the light. That evening, I added another award to my wall. Not a professional accolade this time, but a simple thank you card signed by Claire, Tom, Michael, and others, whose lives had been touched by Emily's manipulation. To the woman who taught us to see clearly, it read, "Thank you for showing us that true strength doesn't need to control others to shine." I traced the words with my finger, feeling the weight of their meaning. The invisible sister had emerged, not with a bang or a dramatic revelation, but with the quiet, unstoppable force of truth finally breaking through to the surface. And in that emergence, I had helped others find their way back to their own authentic selves. 1 year after Emily's birthday party, I stood in front of a podium at the National Environmental Innovation Conference, preparing to deliver the keynote speech. The audience was filled with familiar faces: Claire, Tom, Michael, even Mom, all there to support me as I presented my groundbreaking work on sustainable urban development. As I adjusted the microphone, I caught a glimpse of someone slipping into the back row. Emily. She looked different now, simpler, wearing less armor. The designer labels and perfect makeup were gone, replaced by something more authentic. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded auditorium, and she gave me a small, uncertain nod. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation. We weren't ready for that yet, but it was acknowledgement. For the first time in our lives, she was seeing me, really seeing me, and choosing to stay in the audience rather than try to steal the spotlight. I began my speech not with statistics or technical specifications, but with a story. For most of my life, I said into the hushed room, I lived in the shadows. I thought being invisible was my weakness, but I came to understand it was my strength. Because when you're in the shadows, you learn to see things others miss. You notice the patterns, the connections, the way everything is interlinked, just like the ecosystems we're trying to protect. The presentation that followed wasn't just about sustainable architecture or green technology. It was about building something lasting, something real. As I explained my vision for cities that could thrive without destroying themselves or their surroundings, I realized I was also describing my own journey, learning to exist in harmony with the world around me rather than trying to control it. After the standing ovation, after the congratulations and handshakes, I found myself alone in the conference center's garden. The evening air was warm, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine, just like that night a year ago when everything changed. Mom found me there, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Your father would have loved this," she said, handing me one. "He always said you had a way of seeing the bigger picture." "I learned to see it by being outside of it for so long," I replied, sipping the coffee. "Sometimes the clearest view comes from the margins." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the city skyline. So much had changed in a year. Emily was in therapy, slowly unlearning her patterns of control and manipulation. Michael had rebuilt his company on a foundation of transparency and integrity. Claire had returned from Switzerland and started a successful nonprofit. And me? I had stopped trying to fit into the spaces others left for me and started creating my own. "You know what I realized?" I said to Mom, watching the city lights begin to twinkle on. "The opposite of invisibility isn't being the center of attention. It's being authentically present, taking up exactly the space you're meant to occupy. No more, no less." She squeezed my hand, understanding in her eyes. "You always were the wise one." Later that night, as I stood on my apartment balcony, Looking out over the city I was helping to transform, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The path from invisible sister to visible leader hadn't been straight or easy, but it had been true. I had learned that real power doesn't come from controlling others or maintaining perfect appearances. It comes from being authentically yourself and helping others find the courage to do the same. The invisible sister was gone, but she hadn't been replaced by some louder, more demanding version of myself. Instead, I had become something else entirely. A woman who understood that true strength lies in being seen for exactly who you are, shadows and light together, and helping others step into their own light as well. As I turned to go inside, my phone buzzed with a message from Emily. "Your speech was beautiful. I'm learning to see things differently now. Thank you for showing me how." I smiled, not at the words themselves, but at the fact that for the first time in our lives, they felt genuine. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't in defeating your opponents, but in helping them find a better way to be. And sometimes the best way to step out of the shadows is to show others that they don't need to push people into them to shine. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Give it a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.